Welcome back to The Explainer. We've got an absolutely fascinating one for you today. We're diving into a landmark constitutional court case out of South Africa that perfectly illustrates what happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. We're talking about the clash between the fundamental human rights of individuals and a massive, undeniable national economic crisis. Let's get right into the Larbi-Odam case.
So I want you to ask yourself this. Is it fair to fire a highly qualified teacher just to hand their job over to a citizen? It sounds like a pretty straightforward ethical puzzle, right? But as you'll see, this exact question sparked a massive legal battle with real people's livelihoods on the line.
Section 1. The Teacher's Dilemma. Okay, let's look at the human side of this story.
To really grasp the constitutional law at play here, we need to meet the appellants. We're looking at 8 foreign teachers who are employed in the Northwest Province. Now, technically, they were temporary employees, but that word really doesn't do them justice. These were highly qualified postgraduates from Ghana, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, and Uganda. They weren't just passing through. Many of them had been living in South Africa for over a decade. They were married to South African citizens, they had kids born there, and their supposedly temporary contracts just kept getting renewed year after year. They were deeply rooted in their local communities.
But then, boom, everything shifted. The Department of Education rolled out Regulation 2.2, which explicitly states no person shall be appointed as an educator in a permanent capacity unless he or she is a South African citizen. Just like that, roughly 700 foreign teachers in the province, including our 8 appellants, got notices that their jobs were being advertised. They were suddenly facing the very real threat of losing everything simply because they didn't hold citizenship. It didn't matter how qualified they were or how many years of dedicated service they'd given.
Section 2. The Local Jobs Crisis. Now, it'd be super easy to just call this a bad, arbitrary, bureaucratic move, but we really have to zoom out here.
The sheer scale of the crisis the government was navigating was honestly staggering. They were in the middle of this massive rationalization process, trying to merge 15 different education departments into one national and 9 provincial departments. Funding was incredibly tight. And the math? The math was just brutal. You had 26,000 new educators being trained annually, but over 50,000 current educators were facing retrenchment. To put that into perspective, over 45,000 of those facing job losses were South African citizens. Meanwhile, the foreign non-citizens in the teaching force numbered only around 5,000. So, the government's argument was basically, look, if we keep these 5,000 foreign teachers, that means 5,000 more of our own citizens are going to be fired.
Which brings us to the lower court's ruling. Justice Waddington looked at that overwhelming data and sided with the government. He wrote that, quote, available jobs should in the first instance be made available to the citizens of that state. It makes a certain kind of practical sense, right? A government's primary duty is to protect its own citizens first, especially when resources are literally drying up. So we've got this massive narrative tension. Deeply rooted foreign teachers on one side, and a government desperately trying to manage a devastating unemployment crisis for its citizens on the other. So, who's actually right?
Section 3. The Equality Test. All right, here's where the South African Constitutional Court steps into the ring to figure this out.
They didn't just guess or go with their gut. The court used a really rigorous 3-part analytical framework. Step 1. Does differentiating based on citizenship actually amount to discrimination? Step 2. If it is discrimination, is it unfair discrimination? And step 3. Even if it's unfair, is it somehow justified under Section 33(1) of the interim constitution because the economic circumstances were just that severe? Let's walk through exactly how Justice Magoro tackled this test.
First up, steps 1 and 2. Identifying unfair discrimination. The court defined it super clearly. Unfair discrimination is treating persons differently in a way which impairs their fundamental dignity as human beings who are inherently equal in dignity. Justice Magoro found that citizenship absolutely fits the bill here. Why? Because citizenship is generally an attribute you have very little control over. Plus, historically, and especially in South Africa, where citizenship was violently governed by race, manipulating citizenship has been a tool to marginalize people. So, treating someone unequally purely based on their citizenship status, that is a direct, unfair hit to their human dignity.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Justice Magoro broke the non-citizen group down into 2 categories: permanent residents and temporary residents. For permanent residents, the unfairness was a no-brainer. The government had literally invited them to make South Africa their home. Excluding them from permanent jobs was a total betrayal. But what about the temporary residents, like many of our appellants? Well, legally, their status was pretty precarious. But the court said, actually, let's look at reality. These teachers had been continuously employed for years on rolling contracts. They had built real lives. By forcing them out purely based on citizenship, the regulation was profoundly unfair to both groups.
And if you're wondering why this specific type of discrimination is so dangerous, Justice Mogoro actually pulled in a brilliant precedent from the Canadian Supreme Court. Justice Wilson observed, "Relative to citizens, non-citizens are a group lacking in political power and as such vulnerable to having their interests overlooked." This completely hits the nail on the head. Non-citizens literally cannot vote. They have zero political muscle. If the law doesn't protect them from being cast aside when times get tough, nobody will.
Section 4. The final verdict. Okay, so the court established that the regulation was unfair discrimination, but we still have step 3. Was it justified by the unemployment crisis?
The government pushed hard, arguing their top priority during this crisis had to be job creation for South Africans, but the Constitutional Court completely rejected that defense. For them, it came down to quality education versus job creation. The court declared that an education department's primary foundational duty is to provide high-quality education, period. They are not an employment agency. Yes, fixing unemployment is an absolutely crucial government goal, but it can never be used as an excuse to compromise the quality of education.
And so, we get to the final ruling. The Constitutional Court was unanimous. Regulation 2.2 was struck down entirely as invalid and unconstitutional. The court made a really powerful statement here. You cannot try to reduce unemployment among your citizens by intentionally creating unemployment for your permanent residents. It's just illegitimate. The result? The foreign teachers were protected. They kept their jobs, and the appellants even got their legal costs covered. A total victory.
This whole explainer is just a masterful demonstration of how constitutional law operates. It shows how you have to separate the absolute panic of an economic crisis from the enduring principles of equality and human dignity. But it definitely leaves us with a heavy question to chew on. I'll leave you with this. How should a society balance the urgent economic needs of its citizens with the fundamental human dignity of non-citizens? Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you in the next explainer.